Hello everyone, welcome back to My Hero Academia Podfic. Today will be the final chapter, chapter 6 of Schrödinger's cat. This is entitled Legacy. Quote, "It's about the journey, mine and yours, and the lives we can touch, the legacy that we can leave, and the world that we can change for the better." Tony Dungy. At first, Tokiyami didn't know exactly what to think about Izuku Midoriya. At first glance, he looked like a strange creature, which, coming from him, just proved how true that was. He didn't say that just because he was a contradiction, with some childish behavior but with very old doe eyes, or even the strange relationship that he had with some of his colleagues and even Aizawa-sensei. No, the reason was the reaction that he produced in Dark Shadow. From the first time he had seen Midoriya, the creature that was his quirk had been alert, and that made him wary. There was curiosity coming from the shadowed beast, and he even detected some fear. Looking at Midoriya, who looked so fragile, it was hard to understand the feeling. Even with the others, they commented on the destruction that he had caused against Bakugo. Tokiyami still couldn't understand the reason for these strange feelings the other boy generated in the creature that had him as his host. That was until Aizawa-sensei came to talk to him one afternoon a month after the internship. "So, it is like Dark Shadow." The man nodded, his expression looking even more tired that he led him across the campus to a practice area. He had been wary of the offer and request at first. Even with his class had wrapped itself around the strange creature that was Midoriya. He had kept his distance, but now curiosity spoke louder. "Well, it is definitely sentient." When they reached the entrance, he saw Midoriya. Todoroki was there, which was not a surprise, as the two always seemed to be together. Bakugo being there too, however, was a surprise. Dark Shadow stepped out and looked curiously and toward the other boy. Torn a little bit between confusion and curiosity, though. The teacher paused and turned before they entered, staring at him seriously. "Tokiyami, first of all, you need to know that Izuku's relationship with his quirk is very complicated." Tokiyami could understand that feeling. If the situation was like his own, he had trouble with his quirk, too, until he had made peace with it, even though the occasional loss of control fueled his nightmares. Only recently has he agreed to train with it, but given the situation, it's delicate. I count on you to help him. He was taken aback by the sincerity in the hero's voice. His chest tightened with a strange feeling. It was peculiar to feel important that way. "I'll do my best. That's all I ask." That day, Tokiyami understood some things about Midoriya. The first one, that he was right in his assumption. Izuku Midoriya was a strange creature. Even though he was less debilitated than when he first saw him, he still looked fragile beside the others. Like Tokiyami himself, his quirk also prevented him from developing his stature further. But what he in himself was offset by his dark appearance, in Midoriya the effect was the opposite. He looked harmless and defenseless. Until his quirk kicks in. That was the second fact about Midoriya. He was dangerous. It was like watching a calm lake in the surface that carried inside destructive creatures with apocalyptic forces. The potential for destruction was something they had in common. The fact that they carried something monstrous within themselves, being the guards who had the destruction, was something that brought them camaraderie. When he realized this, his decision was already made. Dark Shadow was still cautious, but curiosity seemed to have gained in him as well. He watched as the beast seemed to sniff around the other boy sitting on the grass, embarrassingly accepting Midoriya's affection on his head. Tokiyami coughed in embarrassment. "How does your quirk feel like?" "It's like a balloon." Midoriya blushed at the childish example and looked at Aizawa-sensei. The man motioned for him to continue. "A balloon expanding in my ribcage. At first it was suffocating. I couldn't breathe. It was like a panic attack." He pondered that. There was some familiarity. "Not any more?" "Not always. When I feel calm, the balloon opens inside and expanding. What's inside escapes through my body, and I can feel it coming out of me. I can't explain the sensation well, but it feels warm." Dark Shadow came back to him, and he touched the beast's head absently. "Definitely familiar, but still different." "Sensei said there was a white mass, right? Do you remember the feeling?" "I don't remember anything when it happened. Do you think you can help me?" Tokiyami studied the other, with his big head and hopeful doe eyes staring at him. "I don't know how similar our situations are, but we can try." Midoriya smiled. They both purposely ignored the weights floating behind them. In the months that followed, the two created a pattern. Weekly they trained together after school at least once. Not a bad idea, as it helped them as well. And it was also interesting to see Midoriya's progress. At first, it was impossible not to notice how he didn't trust his quirk at all, and when he knew the reason, he could not blame him for it at all. But eventually, he tentatively gave himself over to the power. The first major breakthrough they made was when Midoriya tilted, childish in his view as a blanket. A whitish layer appeared out of his body, which could be spread across the floor and even other people. It was hot to the touch, and they found it very hard to penetrate. It's a protective barrier, Aizawa-sensei concluded, and Tokiyami noticed Midoriya's expression becoming distant. When he nodded, his smile tinged with melancholy. Let's continue. Do you think you can expand it? They made the second big progress weeks later. With the exams for the provisional license and later the internships, Tokiyami had failed to go to some of his practices, so it was a surprise when he got there and saw the whitish mass around Midoriya, coming out of his chest and encircling him in motion. Dark Shadow left without his permission, and for a moment he thought that he might have a clash, but the beast just looked curious. Tentatively, the shadow approached Midoriya and saw the white mass that was extending, touching his quirk gently before receding, curling around Midoriya. Tokiyami felt warmth seize him momentarily at the touch, but it was not unpleasant of a sensation at all. Midoriya seemed quite pleased with himself. Dark Shadow rubbed his shoulder, and he heard the whisper of the beast as he was still staring at the white mass. Warm. Somehow over the days, more and more of Class A students began to break into their training, trying to help. Midoriya didn't seem to mind it, smiling shyly at their greetings. And maybe the telekinesis comes from her and not from me. Her? Midoriya paused in his endless mumbling, and his face flushed, looking at Todoroki, who had asked the question. His green eyes widened as if only he had realized what he had said. Yes. I think I keep thinking about my quirk as a she for a while. It seems right? It was not such a difficult concept to understand or so absurd. He was nobody to judge that. Aizawa-sensei patted the other boy's head with a slight smile on his face. Definitely progress. Do you think you can shape it? Her? Like Dark Shadow, except it always has a shape, but it doesn't hurt to try. For some reason, when Midoriya finally managed to shape the white mass a week later, Bakugo had choked on a laugh. Midoriya puffed out his cheeks and threw him into the air. Midoriya had shaped the white mass into a cat. A giant monster cat, with whitish eyes and shifting white fur, made of pure energy, which would be scary if it wasn't rubbing himself into Midoriya like that and licking his face as if there was no tomorrow. Aizawa-sensei crossed his arms, an interesting reaction, as if he was holding himself back to not go over there and hug Midoriya. And the cat, too, probably. Ashido and Kaminari didn't hold back as much as they were clinging to the smaller boy in seconds, rubbing his hair and calling them their precious. Okay, let's try again. Tokiyami felt Bakugo stiffen at his side, and even Aizawa-sensei held his breath. Behind Midoriya, the form became a humanoid body, a white shadow with a small feminine silhouette. Her arms encircled Midoriya's shoulders from behind, floating on his back like a protective angel. He opened his eyes and turned his face back. His expression was a mixture of joy and such sadness that he almost looked away. Hi, Mom. So as far as we know, my quirk can change her shape the way I want it, which is pretty cool and useful. The more fuel I have, the bigger that she can get, and also denser. The denser, the more protection that she gives to me. Her weakness is definitely cold, and my control over her involves my emotions. Not forgetting telekinesis, with almost apocalyptic potential. Todoroki mentioned. His chin settled on Midoriya's head, where they were sitting together at the table, watching as he wrote in the notebook with trembling fingers. Bakugo rolled his eyes and pulled his notebook away, roughly, writing what he needed himself. Tokiyami wondered if this was his way of being kind. It was a strange concept to think about. They were all at the tables, under the tree. Usually he was always looking for a quiet place at the break, but somehow it was hard to say no to Midoriya when he asked for something. It did help that Dark Shadow seemed to be calmer around him, or more specifically his quirk. At that very moment, the whitish mass, again in the shape of a cat, was rubbing against the shadowy beast. How embarrassing. It can detect heat as well, and steal heat from other sources. I think that's it? Kaminari raised his hand, even though the question was rhetorical. No one will comment on how Izuku has a Patronus as a quirk, or that Dark Shadow has a crush now. Everyone started talking all at the same time. It was Christmas. Usually Tokiyami didn't get involved in such festivities, but it wasn't all bad at the moment. Midoriya was sitting on the floor with Eri on his lap, both admiring the gift that Tokiyami had given her. Every little girl, after all, needs a giant sword to defend themselves. Tokiyami was very proud of his choice of gift. The sword went to someone worthy. I went downtown today to register my quirk officially. Tokiyami looked at the other with curiosity. Midoriya smiled towards him, looking more relaxed even though his eyes were still so old. Todoroki was dozing off near them, while Eri patting his head softly. It was a bit admirable how his colleague could nap at any place. Tokiyami-kun, I appreciate everything you did for me. You helped me so much. That same sensation took over his chest. It was good to be of help to someone. After all, he wanted to be a hero. You're welcome, Midoriya. I am always ready to help a fellow guard to understand the beast that he carries inside. Midoriya chuckled at that, and Tokiyami smiled, pleased. If you'll allow me to ask, what did you name her? Midoriya's smile grew more melancholic, his eyes shifting to Eri, who was watching him with curiosity. The little girl smiled at him softly. Legacy. Her name is Legacy. Tokiyami nodded solemnly. Knowing Midoriya's story, he could understand the depth of the name. It was an admirable choice, as Inka Midoriya had been an admirable woman, no doubt. And I will become a hero with her. Tokiyami had no doubt about that either. All right, everyone, this concludes Schrödinger's cat, the entirety of this fic. I hope you all enjoyed this one, and as always, thank you all so much for your support and for listening.